I like it. Hey, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So you got so much going on. On paper, there's all of these things that go on into who you are. But before we get to that, I want to know, 5 years ago, this whole COVID thing, we were like a week and a half into it, trying to figure it out. How did
Right.
you ultimately make it through that time period? And how did it affect and influence the way that you live life today?
That's a great question. Really living through it. I mean, I've been in the medical world for so long. I mean, since age 7. And so much of that has already dictated my life, and I'm used to being isolated as somebody who's disabled. I mean, I hate to say that, but in some ways, our community and culture already had it kind of figured out in some ways. Um, but I would say getting through it, I had really good friends and family that stuck by me, and they do weird random things, whether it was hanging out in the alley outside of my apartment. We try to have conversations over the different steam producing sound things in the alley and trying to yell over to each other and and all the things, or sneaking notes under my door or dropping off food when we knew that was an okay thing to do, and all of that, and a lot of it was, I had a great medical team who had been with me for 20 plus years at the time, so they just knew how to um communicate with me. And actually, it was amazing because of being able to use telehealth. I mean, had the pandemic happened when we didn't have internet, it would be a very, very different story, right? But being able to do telehealth and being resourceful, of all the different things that I already knew how to do to keep my body maintained and keep me safe and all the things. Um, but yeah, again, it was just that connection through, like we're doing today, right? Video calls and just everything that everybody else did, and just having that sense of hope and being able to see how the whole rest of the world was interacting with it and dealing with it and coping with it. I think that also helped to know we were all in it together instead of just the everyday mundane doldrum issues of facing it as just a disabled person. So,
I keep thinking about, when I in the 80s, if this would have happened, how it would have just been like everybody would have been fighting over call waiting and all those little things.
right.
It would have been bad. But I think on my end, as that we mentioned before we got on, my son's on the spectrum. Telehealth was huge because that was always a big stressor. So you get ready, you spend 30 minutes to drive to the appointment. They may spend 5 with him and the rest of the time with me. He's trying to figure out what to do. He's kind of in this office. And then we come back. So we spend almost an hour and a half or so of amping up anxiety and the unknown and all of these things. But when you had telehealth, you could just do what you were doing when you were doing it, no big deal, and everybody
Yep.
got it done. That's the thing that I found really refreshing about that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I live in rural Minnesota, kind of the same thing. It's anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour to my local medical. And then if I go to my specialists that are, down in Rochester, Minnesota, that's like 3.5 hours away or 4 hours away. So it's like, yeah, being able to telehealth over easy things like, hey, your blood work came back. Let's
Uh-huh.
talk about it. Like, why waste the time and energy and, like you said, for your son, disrupting the schedule when
Yeah.
it can just be a quick pop in of like,
Huh?
hey, so and so, great to see you. You're looking great. This looks good. Keep
That's
doing
it.
this.
That's it.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
there would be times where he would just literally hop off the bus. It's like, hey, the doctor's on, come here. And they would be like, hey, what's up? Blah, 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 blah. And then 5 minutes later, he's off doing his thing and I'm
yep,
doing it. And it's great. We're not spending all this extra time and gas.
yep.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. And the best way for me to understand and for others is to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids at career day. There's sixth graders and there's a kid in the back of the room that's curious and he's like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you
Right.
answer them?
I love it because I taught sixth grade for many years. So this
Oh,
is
okay.
a great visual space for me to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I'm trying to make the world a better, kinder, more accessible, inclusive space. So everybody, no matter their ability or disability, feel welcomed, feel like they belong, can thrive, can have employment if they choose to be employed, have authentic relationships, and can be a part of just life like everybody else. And they don't have to deal with the negative stigma that comes around the word disability. They don't have to deal with extra discrimination or obstacles or barriers or oppression. but just sharing stories. And every single one of us in this classroom has a story to share, and every single one of those stories is very important.
So when you were in the sixth grade, what was your dream? Was it to become a teacher?
Not in sixth grade, but in eighth grade, I had an amazing middle school band director that came into my life, and she's the one who really inspired me to become a music teacher. And it wasn't necessarily about the music. I mean, music was where I could excel, because I was the lead trumpet player starting at eighth and ninth grade. And it was the one place where I could be like everyone else. Like we were all in the same playing field. Boom ching. But just doing life. But my disability became a part of that because our band room was inaccessible, because we only had one accessible bus at the time, or had a contract with like the local um AOA, older people, preschool children type transit thing. So there was just lots of obstacles to overcome. But um yeah, she was just very instrumental in my pursuing of my career and becoming the human being that I am today.
So let me ask you this. Take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised, and what were some of the foundational elements? I know you had a diagnosis early on with arthritis. Talk to me a little bit about what it was like growing up, and what were the seeds that were planted into you that turned into being a teacher and an advocate and a musician and all of those things. What was planted into you to become that?
Yeah, I watched my older siblings. So my brother is 16 years older, my oldest sister is 15 years older, and my next older sister is 12 years older. And so my two sisters were in band, and so I always saw a flute laying around and a cornet, which is like a trumpet, hanging around. My dad, worked as a millwright in the local mining situation. So I'm up here in northern Minnesota on the beautiful shores of Lake Superior, very rural. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, did all the housewife stuff, took care of us kids, amazing cook, all the things. So it was really ingrained in us at a young age that, you gave back. You left things better than you found them. You gave the person the shirt off your back if they needed it. Like that was just the way our family worked. And so those, that grit, that perseverance, I mean, we're Scandinavian, or I say Scandinavian, so that that stubbornness is has been an asset and a hindrance at times, but I've tried to always flip it to be an asset, to dig deep and do the hard things. And when a physical therapist said, "All right, 10 more, 10 more," it was like, I know you're going to count backwards and then you're going to count forward, so it's going to be 20, but here we go. Um, yeah, it was an interesting childhood. I mean, I've always said that I'm thankful that I acquired my disability at a young age, because you just don't know any different. So that's how life just was for me. I'm glad that I was the youngest by a lot in my family. I mean, sometimes it's awkward because like I'm a part of the four, but then other times I'm kind of an only child as well, because they were starting their adult lives as I was, becoming diagnosed and doing all the things medically and all of that. Um, But it was hard in some aspects because my friends would always want me to come over to their houses, and none of their houses were accessible. So my parents' house became the place where all of the sleepovers happened and all the birthday parties happened, and all those different things. And there were times when I had better seasons in my disability. So I got to have, I think, like 3 or 4 sleepovers, or at least times away from my house going to friends' houses. Um, but a very different childhood than what I hope kids today that are disabled in my community have. And I'm working really hard to champion that fact of like, it doesn't just have to be the person with a disability's home that's accessible,
Mm-hmm.
but as we build new homes, as we build new housing, like it it all just needs to be accessible, because you don't know
Yeah.
that moment when you're going to have a new diagnosis, that moment you're going to get in a car accident or some other kind of accident, or when you befriend or become a loved one of somebody who has a disability or a different need. So it's like, let's just do it from the ground up
Yeah.
instead of always retrofitting and being reactive. Let's be proactive, because we know that every single life is impacted by a disability in some way, shape, or form.
So being an advocate, you have to be inspired to do that work because it can be heavy work, and being a teacher as well. Who has been that inspiration, that heroic force in your life to allow you to do this, to help, to look out for others? Who's been that for you?
Well, as I said before, I think in all my education, it was definitely my eighth grade band teacher. I mean, she became a great friend and an ally and just, a normal human instead of that superhero like inspiration person. But when I always fought the many different things in my music career, my music teaching career, she'd be the one that I go back to, whether it was just in my mind of like, getting that pep talk or literally texting to be like, all right, I'm in this space, do your thing. But in disability advocacy, I'm I'm sad to say that I didn't find this person until probably about 4 or 5 years ago during the pandemic. But Judy Human um, is, I mean, she is just the mother of disability rights, and she just did the work, and it wasn't just quiet, but because she was an international force, right? She not only championed here in America to get Section 504, IDEA, ADA, but she went abroad and she worked under the Clinton and Obama administrations. Like she was mad as heck and she wasn't taking it anymore. And she loved seeing feisty disabled people changing the world. So it's sad to see that she, hasn't been with us for the last 2 years. But the authentic relationships you can see through her podcasts and just all the different ways that she left her legacy behind for other people to come and walk and wheel in her steps behind her is quite amazing.
I'm glad you brought up the Clinton and Obama administrations because they have been very instrumental in pushing a lot of things forward for everybody in every spectrum of life, from
Mhm.
disabilities to genders to skin colors. And right now, quite honestly, we are living in a world of things getting clamped down on and things being rolled back and restrictions and just a very weird state of fear that we weren't used to under other administrations. Are
Yeah.
you hopeful? How do you remain hopeful? How do you remain in this place of optimism, of being an advocate for this world that right now just seems to be in kind of disarray?
To be honest, I've had to kind of put my head in the sand a little bit from time to time because it is too much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unreal. You feel like you're in a nightmare 1 minute, and then you feel like this possibly can't be happening.
Hmm.
How do we find ourselves here? Why are we being targeted? How are we a threat? Right?
Right.
Um, and yet I also go on to champion and think about all the facts that I share, especially up here in the hospitality and travel industry and those kinds of things. Is like the disability community is not small, it is not poor, and it's not dumb. So even as much as I want to say like don't come at us, in some ways I'm like, all right, well now you're just gonna poke the bear and we're gonna rally around because we know how to do this because we live a hard life every single day. And yeah, it stinks that it's gonna be made harder as different things if it all transpires the way that we're fearfully seeing some things right now. Um, but then again, there's that stubborn Scandinavian person in me that's like, bring it, because we're gonna show you how strong we are and we're gonna do the hard work because we do it every day. But now it's gonna force us to put that hand across the aisle from the mobility community to the autism community, from the autism community to, the invisible disability community to the, I mean, like you name it, we are vast. And we have the whole boomer generation coming in droves into
Yep.
our community, whether they're identifying as that or not, but everybody experiences disability in some way, shape, or form. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I think about with like, when you think about hackers and people like that out there, like the anonymous vigilantes that are trying
Mhm.
to do things for the right reasons, do not anger a bunch of tech nerds because it will come back, And you're totally
Yep.
right. I haven't thought about it from that perspective, but when you deal with parents of children with disabilities in that community, you're dealing with a lot of bears,
Yep.
a lot of people that are ready to roll. So
Yep.
that's a great perspective. So let me ask you this: in the world of inspiration, amazing people that exist out there, if you could meet one person that you find inspiring that might help you on your journey, who would you love to meet and talk to and ask some questions?
I think it would definitely be Judith Human. Like, how did she start doing the thing? And like, as I read her memoir, I can't imagine in the generation that she grew up with in New York and having to fight the New York Board of Education to become a licensed teacher. Like when I read that, I was like, I have to meet you. And that was before she was deceased, and I was a Bush Fellow and all the things. I'm like, let's make this happen. And unfortunately, it didn't. But I think there would be amazing lessons that she, it's probably out there somewhere in the archives of all the things she did online and in different books and papers. And, like we said earlier, her work with the two different administrations for our government. Um, but getting those behind the scenes story, like she had a way of being like, well, I really shouldn't say this, but
Yeah.
um and also like how do you inspire, how do you champion, how do you organize the sit-ins for 504 for the many weeks, months, just how do you balance it? I guess would be my first and foremost question for her. Because, like you said earlier, this is hard work and it's a heavy lift. And it's hard to do that as somebody who's already in a chair and who deals with their own medical stuff. And I think that's sometimes how the disability community and culture don't always move forward because we have all of our stuff to bear. So it's finding that good balance of allies who don't experience disability themselves, but can authentically carry on the work when we have to go and tend to our medical needs or our own mental health needs or whatever it is, to then be healthy and come back and join the fight.
So how do you balance this all out every day? What motivates you to wake up to be an advocate? You got to take care of your own soul. How do you balance
Mhm.
all of these things that make you who you are?
For me, it's a lot about my faith. It's about the prayer warriors that I have in my life, and it's about the authentic relationships that are a part of my tapestry that I've given permission to be like, hey, when I'm out of balance or when you see that I'm exhausted, like call me on it, help me do something about it. And also just trying to have those fun joy-filled times, whether it's learning a new weird random craft of a friendship bracelet you've never made before, or going to a board and brush paint event, or learning how to do blown glass, or going and playing my trumpet in my friend's garage just for me, not for anything else. And I can laugh at myself because that's a humbling piece of metal that I put to my face.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
So let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, ran into that younger version of you that just got your diagnosis, that's looking at this world trying to figure it out, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
dig deep and don't give up because there's beautiful stuff on the other side.
Well said. So let's say you walk into a room of people that have known you in a professional sense. All of the people that you've worked with as a teacher, all of the people that you've worked with as an advocate that knows you in a professional sense. And you could walk up to that podium in that room and tell them one fun thing about you, one fun story, one fun anecdote, something that would humanize you. What would you tell that room of people?
Hmm. I would probably tell them my most death-defying story. When I thought I was a superhuman and I was going to my friend's house who lived down this very big hill from my house. And instead of waiting for help, I said, no, I got it. It's all good. And I had a wood bench on my lap because that's how I could transfer out of my chair to her steps and then transfer to the stool and then get back in my chair once I was in her house. And we loved candles at that time, so I was kind of a pyromaniac, even though that was really not a smart idea, somebody who's in a flammable manual wheelchair. And so anyways, I'm at the top of the hill and I'm like, I got it, I got it. And she's
Uh-oh.
coming down her side or down her driveway, and I lost it on some gravel that was on the asphalt, and I just went careening. And there is a busy road at the end of the hill that I didn't even think about, that a car could have been coming at any time. And then of course there was expletives flying out of my mouth because I was like 13, 14. And all of a sudden I'm like, there's gravel on this next road after you got through the busy road. And then before that, there's train tracks. And so if you've ever been around somebody with a manual chair, if those front casters went the sideways into the, between the train tracks, I would have been flying out of my wheelchair into the big trees that were ahead of me. And through all that, I hear her yelling and her dog barking, and they're trying to run after me. And so I would share that story in the sense of that's kind of what my life has been like. I've got this. I'm in
Yeah.
control. I can
Uh-huh.
do all these things.
Uh-huh.
Not thinking about the semi that could be coming up and down the road or the rock truck, not thinking about a train that could have been coming on the train tracks, not thinking about how am I going to ride my wheelchair through gravel at probably 15 miles an hour as I was careening down this
Yeah.
road. Um, but you got to laugh with it. Sometimes you got to swear with it. Sometimes you just got to dig deep and just hold on and know that there's something better at the end.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. So, of everything that you've done and accomplished in your life up to this point and evolved into, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
Hmm. I would say that instead of being a scared little girl who thought that her story wasn't important, I I gained my, double bachelor's in music education. I gained my master's of education in tech integration. I gained becoming a Blandin leader. I gained becoming a 2020 Bush Fellow, and now I gained becoming a Shannon Leadership Institute cohort member. And so it's not letting those negative scripts or the negative things that the world wants to tell you, but it's finding who you truly are and not letting go of what that is. And for me, that's my faith. That's the identity that I've been given. But it's going through that journey and finding those right people at the right time to be in those spaces of your life, to be your encouragers, to be your partners in life, and to be the people that are giving you that hand when you need that hand to pull you along.
So, in regards to music, who is your favorite trumpeter? Who is someone you emulated?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, I would say combining both my worlds, it has to be Louis Armstrong. I mean, from going from all those tasty jazz licks of back in that time to then, crooning and singing and just being soulful and being a great ambassador for the United States. Like, yeah, totally Louis. I don't improvise as well as Louis, that is for sure, because I am a northern rural white girl from
Sure,
Minnesota. So,
sure. Yeah, my just for context, my son's name is Miles for obvious reasons.
oh,
So
nice.
he's in the ilk. There's a really good movie on Apple Plus about Louis, about his life. You should
Oh,
look it up. It's
okay.
amazing. Like the amount of optimism and kind of his whole raison d'etre, what he did, worked with the UN by going into these war-torn countries when they would stop playing. So
Right.
I'm curious, do you go to live shows? Have you gone to live shows?
Not a ton since the pandemic, to be
Okay.
honest, but before then, yeah.
What was one of your favorite shows that made the biggest impression on you? Favorite live show, early on or otherwise?
It would have been sometime in my high school days. Maynard Ferguson came to a town
Wow.
near us, and of course, he did the whole like, "Oh, little girl in a wheelchair, I'm gonna shake your hand." And I always remember feeling bad because I had a really long thumbnail. So when I shook his hand with my right arm that doesn't bend, he didn't know really what to do with it. And then also I'm like, oh, I think I just dug my big thumbnail into his hand, and I hope he can still play. And like, so that's my most memorable with a famous trumpeter story.
So I got to tell you, of all of the interviews that I've done with musicians, Maynard Ferguson is the one that will pull all of the younger ones into a campfire discussion. He has the best stories. All of the stories, the best ones are Maynard, and
Yeah.
he was the guy. So it's funny that you mentioned out of everybody, was he the one? Was he in one of the early Rocky movies? Was he the one that I think he was in Rocky 3. I know James Brown was, but I thought Maynard
Oh,
was in one of them when they were doing the flashy American thing. I could swear he came out with that horn because he's so powerful. You can't miss
could
him.
be. Yeah.
So, was he just powerful live? Was it just like he just punched that trumpet like crazy?
Oh yeah, you knew where he was at every moment. And even when he walked off the stage into the audience, and even though he was shorter and doing all the things with everybody swooning and all the things, like you knew where he was because
That
his
was it.
presence was just there.
All over the place. He's that kind of guy.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends. everyone that knows you in a personal and professional sense, but ultimately you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm. I'm a fighter for underdogs, and I try to lead with passion, definitely. Sometimes that gets me in trouble. But also just positivity and I hope true, authentic connections. I don't believe in using people. I don't believe in being a part of slimy salesman-y type things. And so, sometimes that can be a detriment as well because being authentic and making those relationships and continuing relationships is a lot of hard work. And many times you have to say no because you're trying to say the greater yes. So that's what I'm trying to learn. That's what I'm trying to become as a leader. But it's hard work and we're
Yeah,
always a new version of ourselves every day when we wake up. So
I get it. Absolutely. So if anyone wants to reach out, they have questions, they want to get involved, they want to learn more, anything about your world, where do they go?
they can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Not Twitter, sorry. Instagram and LinkedIn, Above and Beyond with You. So Above and Beyond stands for going above and beyond the ADA code. And with you is a nod to my musical hat of being Miss You, because little kindergartners can't say Udenberg for their life.
Yeah.
So aboveandbeyondwithyou.org is our website. You can find my memoir Within My Spokes on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And that also has all the information about how Above and Beyond with You was created and our mission and kind of our beginning stages.
So I got to know with your memoir, was it hard to relive all of those times of your life, or was it a cathartic journey? How did it ultimately boil down to when you got the copy in your hand?
It was both. I had a great book writing coach, and she just said, write the stories you can write on the day that you have the energy and the mental bandwidth to do the work. And then worry about putting it all together later. And so that was a great wisdom from her for this process. Um, there wasn't too many stories that like completely undid me because I've, been doing this thing for so many decades already. But seeing it all together. And I think the coolest thing that's happened is, I always say that it's not just my story, it's the tapestry of the lives that come together and we all are interconnected in that way. And so what I love what I hear is I have a good friend locally and then a good friend in a neighboring state. And it's so funny because people will come up to them and be like, "Oh, Megan, I read your book. Oh, Jamie, I read your book." And they're all like, and then they forget that they're in my story, or otherwise they're like, "No, that's my friend Jenna's story." And the persons are like, "No, I read your book. It's really good." And so I'm super glad that those kinds of things happen because it's our story together and how we go forth and make this world more accessible and inclusive.
Wonderful. This has been such a great story. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for talking about it today, and best of luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.